Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the civilian massacres in the Vietnam War. My research question is, did civilian massacres increase or decrease throughout the Vietnam War? What impact did they have on the war? My thesis is because of the way the war was fought and measured, civilian casualties were considered evidence of positive progress and perseveringly fueled the escalation of the war and the resources applied to it. The ways I go about showing this in my timeline are by using a death toll and a toll of the amount of U.S. soldiers that are deployed in Vietnam, and I do this by year. So I show, as you can see, by each year, and if I go right back here, it starts over here with 1956 and it goes to 1972, and when you open it up, you'll just see the number of the death count, and what I'm trying to convey is that when the death count and the amount of soldiers deployed there has increased to its peak. As you can see, it's at like 536,100. That's its peak, because then it starts decreasing again. That's when all the civilian massacres occurred. And the same with the death count, because the more soldiers there are there, the more that will die. That's just common sense. And with these with my timeline of the war, which I just show major events such as anything from having to do with the presidents back in the U.S. to having to do with operations or crises that are having to do with civilians in both the U.S. and Vietnam, and stuff that is going on with the Viet Congs, and I use this to show how the civilian massacres are affecting the war. And these civilian massacres are affecting the war, and they're showing that it's positive progress, and the war is increased, and it's seen as positive progress until the news of these civilian massacres gets out to the public in the U.S., and the war starts coming to an end, which is when the boom of the amount of U.S. soldiers in Vietnam starts to decrease, and the same with the death toll, and the events in Vietnam don't get as important or as recent, or if they are important, they're more to do with what's going on in the U.S. than what's going on in Vietnam. And finally, on January 27th, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords are signed. Now I'm just going to go a little bit into the massacres so you understand a little bit of what these massacres were. So I'm going to start off with the Thai boat incident, which was the killing of 145 civilians. And I just kind of described it a little bit in this paragraph for you to read. And I showed a picture of a memorial that was made for the civilians of Thai Bo that were massacred, and I kind of described it a little bit in my caption. And then for the My Lai massacre, which was the killing of over 500 civilians by the U.S. Army, or more specifically the Charlie Company. But what's really interesting about this specific massacre is that it wasn't released to the public until a year after it occurred, making it almost worse to the public of the U.S. when they realized this was kept a secret from us. And so a lot of people rebelled right after the time of that the My Lai massacre was released to the public. They rebelled, and they're like, we don't want the Vietnam War happening anymore. We don't want the U.S. involved in this. And I just gave you a picture of a tribute to the My Lai massacre, and a picture of around a dozen dead right around the aftermath of the My Lai massacre. And then for the Tang Phong massacre, I have, which was the killing of 350 to 500 civilians by Bob Carey. And I have a little excerpt in here from an interview. And then I put a little bit of a paragraph right here for you to read. And I have this exhibit that's actually in the Ho Chi Ho Chi Minh City Museum, and this is a sewer pipe where 3 children were killed, and they were trying to hide. And this is a placard. It's done in Vietnamese and English, so if you want to read it, you can read it there. And then for the Song Tang massacre, there's not really a lot of evidence on it, but it was the killing of 16 women and children by the U.S. Marine Corps. And I couldn't find very much information on it, but I do know of another source that you can go to find some more information, which is Song Tang, An American War Crime, which is a novel by Gary D. Solis. And this is a great resource if you want to go find some more information on this particular massacre. And I think that, and after going into detail on each of the massacres, I've just come to I do show it in all of my reports on this, that the civilian massacres were in fact considered positive progress, and they did fuel the escalation of the war. Thank you for listening.